plates of the car have been removed. So a very suspicious kind of thing. What's more, 2 people are finally arrested the next day, and when they're arrested, they've turned out that they're both on terrorism watch lists here in France. And all this is taking place while the country is supposed to be under maximum security. So it's raised a lot of questions about the police response, but also what were these people up to? Was this a real terrorist attack? Or perhaps it was a kind of a test, as some terrorist experts here are suggesting, a test by the terrorists trying to see what the response time was for the police.
Thanks, Jim Bitterman there, speaking to me a little bit earlier from Paris. Well, now I'm going to hand you back to Wolf.
For the second time in as many days, airstrikes have hit the same area in Aleppo, Syria. We want to warn you, the images you're about to see are very disturbing. The heartbreaking cries of children as they are treated at a makeshift hospital. An activist from the Aleppo Media Center tells CNN at least 7 people were killed, 40 injured following today's airstrike. Comes on the heels of yesterday's suspected chemical attack in the very same area. This footage, released by activists in Aleppo, shows people gasping for air at a hospital. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights accuses the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad of using warplanes to drop barrel bombs containing chlorine gas. More than 2,000 miles away, the Syrian opposition is in London. They're laying out a plan for a political transition to try to end that 5-year civil war. Let's bring in our senior international correspondent, Arwa Damon, who's joining us live from Istanbul. Arwa, talk to us a little bit about the horror that's happening in Aleppo right now.
Well, Wolf, our viewers just got a brief glimpse of it in those 2 videos that you were showing right there. You had this initial gas attack of sorts that took place yesterday. And when people in a place like rebel-held Aleppo succumb to this type of an attack, they're not going into a fully functional hospital. If they're going into these makeshift clinics, most of which are underground, because when they were above ground, they were bombed, oftentimes deliberately, by the Syrian regime or by the Russians. This is according to aid organizations. And so these clinics are functioning underground. They don't have regular electricity. They're running on generators that are, of course, reliant on diesel fuel. And that is in very short supply because these are areas under siege. You saw in one of those clips that toddler crying desperately, his mother standing right next to him, unable to comfort her child. Because, well, when you live in rebel-held Aleppo or in most rebel-held parts of Syria and you survive one attack, you don't get to breathe a sigh of relief, because the next day you are more likely than not going to succumb to yet another strike. And this has been the reality for Syrians in many parts of the country for more than 5.5 years.
Arwa, how do they know it was a chlorine gas attack?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, activists and medical aid workers that CNN spoke to say it was because of the smell, but also because of the symptoms. They've been through this before. This exact same neighborhood in Aleppo called Sukkari has been targeted by what activists and aid workers and other organizations say was chlorine gas. And so they've been through this. There are other parts of Syria that have been through similar strikes as well, and there are networks in place where they exchange information about the kinds of various different kinds of weapons that they're being hit with, so that they can figure out how to better treat the symptoms. This is nothing new, Wolf. This chemical weapons red line was crossed back in August of 2013 with that strike that happened in the Damascus suburb of Ghouta, where hundreds of people, if not upwards of 1,000, were killed. America's red line was crossed back then, and over the last 3 years since all of that transpired, nothing in the country has changed.
Britain's foreign minister hosting talks in London today. We're also told that the U.S. And Russian foreign secretary of state, they're getting ready to meet. Any hope at all for progress?
Look, one always has to cling on to hope, because if that all flies out the window, then there really is nothing left. Here's the problem, though. Everything is talk at this stage. Everything is rhetoric. And all of those different entities that you mentioned right there, Wolf, they're all basically backing different players within Syria. And the population realizes this. They feel as if they're pawns in this broader political game that's playing out regionally and to a certain degree globally. So is there hope? No, very little at this stage. But that's what people have to live with.
Arwa Damon reporting for us in Istanbul, and she has certainly seen so much of this horror, so much of this destruction over these years. Arwa, thank you so much for joining us. Other news we're following. It appears that an outburst by the president of the Philippines is now apparently somewhat forgiven. An official with the White House tells CNN that President Obama and the Philippines President Duterte spoke briefly before the ASEAN GALA dinner. CNN was also told the exchange consisted simply of pleasantries. Before the summit, Duterte blasted President Obama, calling him an SOB. The White House canceled a planned meeting between the two men. Duterte now says he regrets his comment. Coming up, a very different story. To upgrade or not to upgrade, Apple set to unveil its next generation iPhone, but all the buzz is about what it may not have. We'll update you when we come back.